Hello, I'm Sheila Alice, Chief Deputy Superintendent at the Michigan Department of Education. The pandemic and the unplanned shift to remote learning have widened the learning gap for many students in our state. I'm pleased and excited to share a new initiative that MDE has launched to assist educators in their efforts to fill student learning gaps. This new initiative is called Accelerated Learning. Historically, there has been a strong tendency for schools, based on past practice, to want to remediate student learning gaps and delay access to grade-level work until all the missing learning is remediated. Research shows that this approach moves students backwards by continuing to widen the academic gap between students who are being remediated and their grade-level peers. Acceleration, on the other hand, has proven to keep students moving forward in their intended grade-level trajectories by strategically preparing them for success in current grade-level content. Acceleration focuses on teaching only what must be learned at a given level, instead of trying to teach everything that a student did not learn in a previous grade or grades. When accelerating student learning, educators identify and teach only the most important skills and knowledge for a specific unit the class is studying, focusing on skills and knowledge minimally required for a student to adequately access grade-level material. Acceleration requires teachers to identify crucial content that they need to teach and that students need to learn so that students can access current grade-level material. Acceleration is often associated with gifted education. However, academic acceleration includes a wide variety of educational strategies that impact the learning progress of all students, regardless of where they are in their learning trajectory. Acceleration focuses on preparing students for success with upcoming new learning and lays the foundation for continued academic growth. Accelerating student learning improves student engagement, provides access to rigorous grade-level material and assignments, identifies the crucial gaps, identifies the critical content, including key skills and knowledge that teachers need to teach, and it helps every student close the learning gap and demonstrate grade-level skills. The department has created a web page on the MDE website that houses accelerated learning resources. The first resources released include a series of informational guides that MDE staff members developed based on current research and in collaboration with education partners throughout Michigan. We appreciate our thought partners in this important work. Their feedback and input were immensely helpful and useful in the development of these guides. The first series of guides include these 8 topics: acceleration versus remediation, targeting support with tutoring, focus on essential skills, Tier 1 grade-level instruction, accelerated learning through student engagement, assessment practices for acceleration, social-emotional learning and the benefits of acceleration, and acceleration in early childhood education. The web page will be expanded to include video introductions to these guides, professional learning opportunities, links to accelerated learning resources from partner organizations, and ideas and voices from the field. Our goal is to provide valid, research-based accelerated learning support for our educators to assist them in becoming even more effective as they implement strategies to help our students thrive. I encourage you to check out MDE's Accelerated Learning webpage. This is just the beginning. We look forward to the continued development and expansion of this website. We also look forward to working with you as we build resources to support our collective efforts to ensure success of all Michigan students. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the 4th webinar in the Accelerated Learning Summer Webinar Series. Our presenter this afternoon is Dr. Kevin Feldman. Kevin is an independent educational consultant working with publishers, schools, and districts across the country. His career in education spans over 40 years. His major contributions include work in the areas of student engagement, academic vocabulary, comprehension, critical thinking strategies, preventing early reading failure, linking assessments to instruction, and developing school-wide literacy support models for elementary, middle, and high schools. There's been a significant focus on students at high risk. We are honored to welcome Dr. Kevin Feldman for today's webinar.
Well, good morning, everybody, or afternoon for you. I'm over here on the left coast in the west, a little bit smoky from the fires, but we are doing well. It's a real treat for me to be presenting this webinar for everybody. I have dear friends and family in Michigan, so I've been there many times, and I just really support and wish you all the very best. Hopefully things are moving towards some level of normalcy as we are engaging in face-to-face learning, and this whole issue of accelerating student learning. And the aspect that I'll be exploring with you this afternoon is one that we all know about, engagement. And my goal is to help us look at this with a little bit more precision perhaps, and add some more tools to the toolkit, and maybe some focusing on the urgency of really moving forward with these practices in a way that is open-ended as we continue to reflect on what's working and how we can improve the good things we're already doing. So thank you for being here, and let's go ahead and jump in. One thing, I'll be using the phrase academic literacy this afternoon. And I want to be clear, I don't just mean reading when I say literacy. I mean literally the definition, which is reading, writing, speaking, listening, thinking, right? So when we think about academic literacy, this is true across the grades from preschool through high school and college, and across the content areas. So we could have scientific literacy, artistic literacy, mathematical literacy, and so forth. So this is really something that's academic literacy that is critical to everyone, and gets that right at the heart of engagement, how to engage every single student every day in becoming more academically literate in their thinking, their reading, their writing, their speaking, and their listening. I'll be arguing that engagement is literally the foundation for universal academic literacy. Engagement is a complex construct. It has many attributes, some that are social, emotional, some that are intellectual. But when we start out just foundationally and ask, well, what is engagement? I think that the cleanest, simplest, without being simplistic, definition I've found is this: visible participation. And I have to credit Bend High School in Bend, Oregon for helping me with this. I used to have a long-winded definition because I wanted to include everything. And they said, you know, Feldman, when it gets right down to it, the heart of engagement is visible participation. If you can't see it, you don't know if it's there or not. So thanks to the Lava Bears at Bend High School. So its role is foundational, this engagement or visible participation, the speaking, writing, and doing of every student, every lesson, every day, which impacts their ability to build knowledge, vocabulary, concepts, various schema, experiences, etc., as well as be able to understand, to cognitively process that knowledge, and then respond by some form of speaking, writing, doing, etc. So all these, of course, spin together in an ongoing web of hopefully productive and helpful learning as we examine how can we accelerate this engagement. So I want to be clear, engagement alone is not the goal, it's the means. The goal is, of course, learning, continuing to grow student competence, get smarter in a cognitive sense, but also in a social, emotional sense, to spark curiosity, creativity, imagination, maybe even having some fun along the way. So engagement alone is not the goal. It is the means to these various goals. So we have a challenge, right? Because thinking, listening, reading are all covert. They happen in the privacy of your mind. And we don't know if students are truly understanding, grasping the concepts, etc., really getting it, unless we prompt them to make their thinking overt so it can be seen, right? Visible thinking. is the heart here. That's how we know they are engaged. One way of thinking about this that I heard years ago from a former colleague of mine when I was at UC Riverside in Southern California, Spencer Kagan, he called it the why of structured engagement. And he said, if you want them to hear it, you talk. If you want them to learn it, they talk. Now, obviously, he's being hyperbolic here, right? That's an exaggeration. But the heart of it's really, really important, this idea of everyone doing everything. We want to make sure that, of course, we want them to hear it, and we want, obviously, teachers to talk, but we need students talking as they're making sense, as they're clarifying what they understand, what they don't understand. I call it everyone does everything. I mean that literally, not just figuratively. And that includes doing it wrong, giving the message that mistakes are our friends, even when sometimes they're embarrassing or they make us feel less skilled or competent. They're a critical stopping point along the road to competence. Think about it. Anything difficult that you've learned in your life, you had to go through lots and lots of really feeling incompetent, making mistakes, but turning that into an opportunity for learning and to celebrate that, hey, you're engaged, you're giving it a go. So when we think of visible participation, there's 4 cornerstone principles to engagement that I think are worthy of keeping in mind as we examine this concept together of how do we accelerate engagement. First is frame engagement as not a choice. It's literally how we play the game. Now, I want to be clear here. You can't force engagement. It's not about it's a requirement. It's just the way we do it. So we make students, the way I like to think about this is we make them an offer they can't refuse. Now, how do we do this? Well, it's not by force. It's not by threat. In fact, it's the opposite. It's first of all creating an environment that's safe. It's safe emotionally. It's safe socially. It's safe cognitively, because of the relationships that we've established both between ourselves and our students and students and each other. Second, not only are we prepared, but we prepare the students so they know they're ready for whatever it is, for the discussion, for the activity, for whatever's next that we want them engaged in. And they know that they will be supported. The jargon in education would be scaffolded, which is temporary support, right? So it's like the training wheels on the bicycle. We just don't jump on the mountain bike and zoom down some black diamond run. We start first with the training wheels, right, in the parking lot. So it's issue of being supported. So it's obvious we have their back. So number one, it's not a choice. It's how we play the game. Everyone does everything. Number two, it's observable, right? That's obviously clear in this idea if it's visible. You can see it. Number three, it requires student action. And when you think of it, at its core, the only 3 ways students can react is by saying something, by writing something, or by otherwise doing something. And doing can be anything else. It can be clicking on something, it can be acting something out, it can be a gesture, it can be drawing, etc. And then last, the issue of it's intentional. It's engagement by design, not by hoping. Although I'm all for hope and prayer, it's more than that. It's design. It's not by chance. We teachers make it happen by building the structure of engagement into each and every single thing that we do throughout our lessons. Now, how do we go about this? Well, when we understand that at its core, it's the quantity and quality of student saying, of student writing, and student doing, then there's some things to keep in mind here. One is a little aphorism that I call Feldman's never more than 2 to 10 rule. Now, what I mean by that is in a typical lesson, never more than 2 to 10 minutes goes by without every single student, not many, not most, not those that want to, but every single student saying something, writing something, or otherwise doing something in direct response to engagement with that lesson. Now, this issue of never more than 2 to 10, I made those numbers up. There's actually lots of research here that indicates that we need to chunk learning so students are responding and getting feedback all the time. And the truth is, it varies. If we're talking primary kids and skills, say like phonemic awareness and sound symbol correspondences and early mathematics, right? It might be 2 to 10 seconds. But the big idea is not too long without some pause where then we prompt students to say, write, or do. Never more than 2 to 10. All right, so let's start looking concretely at how this plays out in our quest to accelerate student learning. I call this section the power of partners. When class size is larger than 4, structured partner talk or work or doing, saying, writing is the most efficient and effective way to engage all students in active learning. It's one of the reasons, by the way, that one-to-one or small group instruction is so important, because there students can't help but be engaged because it's face-to-face and the groups are small. But once we start moving into whole classes and larger groups, some students can get lost easily, particularly students that come to us, particularly in this era of the pandemic, as students having missed lots of school or maybe not having been as involved in the online learning as we would have liked. These learning gaps that the superintendent referred to are very real. And there's no simple answers here, but part of the answer is really refining our use of partners to engage all students when we have class sizes larger than 4. Now, I like to think here and ask teachers, ask myself, why not simply just turn and talk? Why not just think, pair, share? And when we thought, what's the problem with simply turning and talking? And what we find the problem is that's not enough structure. Why? One student can't dominate or do all of the work. If we simply say turn and talk, the kids most likely to talk are the kids with higher background knowledge, kids that are most interested, and the kids that do not have or have the fewest learning gaps. So if we want to accelerate everybody, then we ought to be clear we need more structure than simply turn and talk. Another problem, if we just turn and talk, every student's not practicing active listening where you're actually doing something, right? So active means discrete jobs. What's the job of the listener? Is it to paraphrase? Is it to agree or disagree? Is it to elaborate? So this issue of students practicing using academic language, critical vocabulary. So we find if we add a bit more structure, we can take turn and talk and really turn it into something far more powerful. And of course, no opting out. Everyone does everything, including when a student says, I don't know. Good. Then we scaffold them and we give them, well, you could use answer A or answer B. Give that a go and see what you find. So let's look at some details here. I call this precision partnering or intentional partnering. So one, be thoughtful about how you structure who's partner 1 and who's partner 2. You want slightly more advanced students with slightly less advanced. So if you would roughly rank order your class, a class of 30, 1 through 30, you want one with number 16, 17, or 18, not one with 30 and not one with 2. What we find then is we teach these 4 L's, right? The first L is when you're with a partner, you make eye contact. I find a good way to teach this is by exaggerating, making it kind of fun, kind of silly. And with older students, you can do it almost like an exaggerated skit on SNL or something. So you make eye contact without staring, right? Number 2, you lean a little towards your partner without getting in their face and making them uncomfortable. Number 3, you use a low or a library voice. And number 4, you demonstrate listening. Active listening means you respond, right? Some kind of accountable talk, whether, once again, you paraphrase, you agree, you build on, you add something. So here's a poster made by a middle school teacher that was in a group of mine in Western Washington. And I really like this because it nice and cleanly, sort of MC Escher-esque, right? Of making it nice and clear what those 4 L's are. Make a good classroom poster, reminder for us and for the students, right? So when we think about listening is active. So what are the actions, right? Listening doesn't simply mean you're not speaking. It means you're going to say paraphrase. Incredibly powerful. Research on paraphrasing indicates comprehension goes up significantly when students are able to paraphrase, put in their own words what was said. When we agree or disagree with justification, with reasoning, with a rationale. When we correct or prompt a correct response. So students get feedback and then they're able with a bit of scaffolding to answer in a more complete way. When they can build on or elaborate, and you can see the rest here, right? Big idea is, I think we've often unwittingly made the mistake of giving students the message that listening is simply not speaking. And it's really far more than that. But the problem is listening, right, is done silently in your mind. So we need to make listening visible by teaching kids how to do the various things I've listed there for you. So let's look at an example. In a moment, we'll be playing this video. And when we do, look at how these first graders using a program called peer-assisted learning have clear, discrete roles where every student's actively engaged. We're going to be listening to just a pair, but in a class of, say, 30 or a class of 20, this would be 15 or 10 pairs. So here we go with first graders with peer-assisted learning, in this case.
A log in the pen. Stop. Sound it out. And what word? Pond. Good. Start over. The frog is napping on a log in the pond. Pam is planning to nab the frog. She grabs a net and slips to the log. She swings the net. Bam! The frog plops into the pond and swims to land. Pam is left in the pond dripping wet. Good. Mark 5 points.
Very sweet, huh? And not only is it sweet, the research on it is incredibly good. About 30 plus years, if you look at the Wentworth Clearinghouse or go to the IES, Institute on Education Science website, you can see literally tens of studies across K through 6th grade and for intervention in middle school and high school. And I've provided the resource here, very cost effective and socially, emotionally. Kids love it. We also find for second language learners, this really accelerates language development. Why? Because the kids are so engaged and it's so interactive and it's very mutual. So one kid is the first reader, first coach, and then it's fully reciprocal. They swap roles and they do it one more time. Incredibly powerful. When we look at the research, here's a study going back to 1998 from Reading Research Quarterly by Patricia Mathis and her colleagues. And you can see everybody benefits, but who's accelerated the most? The neediest kids. In this time of coming back to school after the pandemic, and hopefully we get this variant under control, this is more important than ever. So I urge you, look at how we use structured partners. Now, it's not just for little kids. Here's a quick example from a high school speech class. Okay, we have an issue here with the audio. Let me interrupt. I just had a question. This would be a great time while we're seeing if we can get this loaded. And let me read it to you so everybody can hear the question. At the beginning, you mentioned freedom to make errors. Is there value in making errors when no feedback or self-monitoring is available? Good question. I mean, for me, all questions are good questions. I think there's value in making errors, but when there's no feedback, the problem is errors can simply become habits. Now, if we can teach self-monitoring, that's great. And we want kids monitoring, like learning how to evaluate their own writing, for example. But sometimes it's very difficult without feedback from an outside source. So when we're in a classroom, we can certainly teach kids how to, for example, peer edit, and they can give each other feedback. But the point I was making is that we want to communicate to students, don't be frightened of making errors. Don't view errors as something to be embarrassed about. And I would use examples from sports, from music, from other things outside of school that they may be familiar with, where they understand, say like when they were learning how to ride a bicycle. You just don't hop on that bike and ride, right? You have training wheels, you make mistakes, but you get a little bit better. You raise the training wheels up a little bit every day till one day, boom, you can ride. And then you're not done. Then you learn to ride more and more difficult things depending on your interests. Well, learning in mathematics, learning in writing, learning in the sciences is exactly that way. Okay, so thank you very much. And with what we have here that you can see, and I can just tell you what's happening, is we have a high school teacher who's basically doing the same thing, giving students a task of working in pairs. They're working on an argumentative thesis statement where they have to be able to name the issue, the action, and the location. And the kids hold up their hands for their partner, and they put up one finger when they identify either the action, issue, or location. And so they have 1, 2, 3, so they get visible feedback on what they are doing as the teacher is monitoring the whole class. All right. So a key shift here. Okay, and I had another question. Let me go ahead and answer this right now. What would be the first thing you would do at the beginning of the school year to establish a classroom where engagement is just a way of life? Great question. First thing I would do would be to tell students explicitly that this is a classroom where we will all be learning together, and we will learn in many different ways. We'll be whole class, and then maybe have them do a choral response where we all say something, right? Or repeat a phrase or a sentence. Then where we do a brief activity in pairs, we give them something very simple. And then we have pairs respond, and then maybe we do something in a small group, and keep it very easy. So the content part is simple. We're talking about things that we did over the summer, or we talk about, favorite athletes or events from the Olympic Games or whatever, where the content is simple so we can teach them the process. What we've learned is when we're working with any new strategy, right? Like this, everyone does everything, and say structured partners. When the strategy is new, keep the content very simple. So we're using things that students already know, so we can focus on the process. Then transition to more challenging content. And we find that so we can focus on the process and not the content. And once we have our feet wet, so to speak, with the process, then we scaffold them into the content. And the more we do that, the more it becomes a habit. And then being very explicit about it. When somebody makes a mistake, thank them first for giving it a go, or thank them for reflecting when they said, boy, I don't know. Well, good. So you thought about it, and you say, you know what? You're not sure here. So then you scaffold, and they're able to respond. Great question. Thank you very much. All righty. So this shift here is moving from just expecting listening as meaning not speaking to teaching how to listen, to model it, giving specific jobs. Every time you want your students to listen, please ask yourself in your planning, how will I know they listened, right? What will be their job? And that job could be any one of the 7 or 8 that I listed, or anything else, as long as they're visibly showing you that they actually heard. And then we provide academic language support or scaffolding, and of course, lots and lots of practice. When we look at the Common Core standards for speaking and listening, which, by the way, I'm a huge fan of, because it really makes speaking and listening as important as reading and writing and doing, right? Just look here. This is 2nd grade, right? Building on others' talk in conversations by linking their comments to the remarks of others. How often do we hear, even in high school, in a discussion, students say, my idea is similar to Marilyn's. I also think that, however, I beg to differ on this. And my experience is almost never, unless teachers have taught it, right? And what we find is, even as young as second grade, giving students simple response protocols like my idea is similar to, I agree with, because, and that students practice this so we really learn how to have conversations in a group. What we find is, as we go up through 8th grade and high school, of course, they get more and more difficult. Look here at 8th grade and just follow along as I read this. Delineated speakers' arguments, specific claims, and evaluating the soundness of the reasoning, relevance and sufficiency in evidence, and identifying when irrelevant evidence is introduced. Wow. Teaching that and breaking that down, starting with the term delineate. See, we need to be using this academic language with students. Now, I would ask, how many typical 8th graders or even high school students, if you just ask them, what does the word delineate mean? How many would actually know it? Now, I would argue they know it, but they don't know that they know because they've not used it. All delineate means is break something down, get specific. They delineate after, on Saturday after every Friday night party if they're in high school, or after the basketball game, right? So teaching them delineate means break it down, get specific. So we need to use academic language and teach them how to use it also. All righty. So this notion of the critical role of discussion. So whatever their intended major or profession, high school graduates will depend heavily on their ability to listen attentively to others so that they're able to build on the meritorious ideas while expressing their own clearly. Well, that's fancy language for saying discussion is really important. And it's one of the ways that we can accelerate engagement is by really improving the quantity and quality of class discussion. So we're teaching students the speaking and listening skills required for discussion. Now, when we look at the research on discussion, Professor John Hattie has done more of these meta-analyses or these syntheses or summaries of studies than just about anyone in the world. And he finds out that structured class discussion is one of the most critical and most powerful forms of achievement in terms of effect size. And effect size higher than 0.40 is considered very significant. Well, this is double, right? And we couple this deliberate practice, 0.79, with classroom discussion. It's one of the most powerful things we can do. So really focusing on quality discussion is really, really important. But we have a problem. Here's one problem, right? And that is when we ask teachers to think, what % of students across the country actively participate in typical classroom discussions? I've asked this literally of thousands of teachers. And what I get on average is somewhere between 10 to 20%. I call it the 20-80 dilemma. 20% of the kids are doing 80% of the discussing, right? And we find when we look at the research, this is exactly what we find in classrooms. So the challenge here is how can we flip this on its head? To accelerate student learning, this is what we really need to do, is to, in terms of discussion, is create the conditions and use the tactics and strategies that ensure at least 80 to 90 to 100% of students, which is obviously our goal, are actively engaged in discussion. So how do we do this? Well, first of all, let's look at what we call normative discourse structure. How's discussion structured in typical classrooms? Typically, it's teachers pose a question and students raise their hand to respond. I love this. Here we have one kid who is just exuberance, is just blasting her out of her seat in excitement. while the kid right behind her is near comatose? Or how about looking at middle school? Now, that kid right behind the girl with her hand up, he may be thinking about the causes of the Industrial Revolution, but I doubt it. He might be thinking, what's for lunch? Or, boy, she's cute. Should I talk to her? But the problem is, when we go up through high school, right, same thing. In fact, you can shadow kids and follow them period by period, and we find it's the same 20, 30% doing most of the talking in class. How can we change that? How can we accelerate? Well, there's some real concrete things we can do starting day one. First thing is, stop hand raising. And what I mean is, of course, we want hands up when you have questions. We love questions. Want hands up when we ask for volunteers or who can add. But as the primary way we structure talk, we structure discussion, hand raising has got to go the way of the dodo bird, right? So when we look at how can we get everybody responding, my dear friend, and certainly a friend to teachers in Michigan, Dr. Anita Archer, we've been friends for over 40 years, has what we call a visible participation toolkit, tactics to build into any strategy you want to use, any grade level, from kindergarten through high school physics. And they are things we do together. So these can be response cards, they could be clickers, they could be oral, verbal responses, things we do together, right? Fabulous. That's when the answers are short and the same. Precision partnering, which we've briefly talked about, or small group work, which we'll talk about more in a bit, where we have clear roles. Written responses, and this could be on a Chromebook, it could be on a slate, it could be on a little whiteboard, all kinds of ways. And then individual responses after students have had some rehearsal or practice, right? And we do it randomly or strategically. Looks random, but it's really not. So no hands up. And what we find is when we do this, it's incredibly powerful. All right. So big idea here is these list of all these tools. We build them into any strategy, whether the strategy is reciprocal teaching, the strategy is Socratic Seminar, strategy is partner reading, whatever it happens to be. So the aphorism is everyone does everything, including doing it wrong. All righty. So here's an example of Anita Archer and just focusing on one aspect of this not raising our hands with a little bit of Anita humor.
So answer, what does that mean? Well, here's what it doesn't mean.
Can we cue the video?
Kevin, it looks like it was working on your end.
Oh, great. Okay, here we go.
When I teach and I ask a question, in my class, students don't raise their hands. So when I ask a question, you will not raise your hand. I know that seems un-American, probably un-Oregonian, but we're not going to raise our hands. We're going to do some other things instead.
Gotta love it. Un-Oregonian. So just using a little lightweight humor here, but to make the point, we're not going to raise our hands when I pose a question. Instead, we're all going to think and we're all going to respond. Now we have choices on how they respond. They might respond in pairs, they might respond in writing, they might respond on a clicker, they might respond all together. So we have lots and lots of room here, but what we don't want to do is fall into that trap of just some students responding. Here's one of my favorites. So this is the same idea, but with little second graders, and watch how Anita handles this.
Now, you are in what grade, everyone? Second. Boy, by the time you're in second grade, you've had many different teachers. And as a result, you have many different things you've learned. So I got to take a minute to teach you how to be my students. First thing, when I teach, I need to have you sitting up. Boy, you're sitting right up, not standing up, but sitting up, and not slumped over, but sitting up. Perfect. Excellent. Good job. And you need to be looking right at me. Oh, good job looking here. And you need to look as smart as you can. Oh, a smile. That was a smart touch. Oh, very good. Oh, hands folded on your desk. That is very smart. Nodding. That shows you're paying attention. Excellent. Oh, looking very good. So everybody, hang out for just a moment. Lean over, hang out. When I say ready, I want you to sit up, look at me, and look as smart as you can. 1, 2, 3, ready? You're ready? You're ready? You're ready? Hang out one more time. And 1, 2, 3, ready? You're perfect. You're perfect. Excellent. Now, here's something I do that may be a little bit different than your teacher, and that is when I ask a question, students in my class don't raise their hands. So when I ask a question, are you going to raise your hands? Yes or no, everyone? No, unless I say, raise your hand. So everybody, raise your hand. Then you can do that. But here's what we're going to do instead. When the answers are very short, we're going to say the answers together. I'll ask a question. I will put up my hands. This says, think, do not blurt. And when I lower my hands right there, you'll say the answer. Got it? Okay, ooh, good job sitting up. So get ready. So everybody, what day of the week is it? Everyone, it's?
November.
The day of the week is Friday. Oh, I can't believe you'd forget that. Let's try it again. So what day of the week is it? Think.
Friday.
Think. Everyone, Friday. Now let's practice that again. This is think. You don't say it until I lower my hands right there. Okay. So what day of the week is it, everybody? It's
Friday.
all right. Of course, tomorrow it will be
Saturday.
I didn't fool you. After Saturday.
Sunday.
Perfect. That gives everybody a chance to think. You are so good. Now, sometimes you're going to say an answer to a partner, and I'm going to give you a partner. And whoever your partner is, I expect you to be very kind to them. And
I've seen this many, many times, and it cracks me up each time he shouts out November. But it's a great example of we need to teach the various engagement routines we are going to use and do it your own way. You don't have to do it like Anita. You do it your way, but do teach them. So what we find is this issue of eliminating hand raising and instead use what I call all call. Some people call it cold call. Cold to me implies a pejorative, a negative. But whatever you call it, it's everybody's on board, and we could call on anyone at any time, so everybody's on their learning edge. So we're accelerating everyone, right? And it can be sticks with names in a can, but remember, don't lay the stick down, put it back in the can, so it could be anybody, anytime. Deck of cards with names, students can pick random number generators. Teacher choice appears random, but it's really not. In fact, I would argue that you want to call on your less proficient students 2 to 3 times more frequently than your more proficient students, because they need the most practice. Have it look random, but who's the only person who can read the name on the stick? The teacher. The kids can't. They can't see it too far away. And then say, who's got something different we haven't heard? Then your kids with higher background knowledge, more advantages, they'll chime in. So everybody's engaged and everybody is accelerated. So our goal is ensuring every classroom in your school is a no chill or chill-free zone. Impossible to chill in your classroom. All righty. So a quick summary here of this issue around discussion. Common questioning for discussion tactics, if you will, that are less effective are various forms of who can tell me, does anyone know, who would like to. All these imply one person, and it is the person that wants to volunteer. Instead, I recommend and urge you to play with this on day one. In front of any question or direction, insert the word everyone. Till it happens so frequently that students understand it's always everyone. Why? Because we're an everyone does everything classroom. And usually it's a prompt to stop and think. some prompt to think, and you may even specify the kind of thinking. It may be to agree or disagree, or it may be to add on to, or it may be to compare and contrast, etc., right? And then ask yourself, what visible evidence of thought is appropriate here? And it could be some form of saying, writing, or doing, right? Yeah. And then ask yourself, do I want to use a quick partner share here or go right into the whole class? Partners is usually preferable because we can get every single kid responding, and it is very efficient, right? And then we want to also build in what kind of precision partner talk, who goes first. Maybe you want them to use a sentence frame or starter, so they're using a technical word like delineate or precision, or clarification or clarify, right, as we're building their vocabularies. And then strategic calling, right, without hands up, that's fake random. Meaning it's not really random because you're being thoughtful about who to call on, but it looks random to the students, right? And then volunteers. Who else has something that we haven't heard? And of course, always scaffold and prompt as needed. All means all. That is an outline of the critical elements that really bring this discussion to life. Let's look at an example in high school. The prompt here is they've just read some excerpts of Mark Twain's fairly recently, about 4 years ago, published autobiography. And the question is, was Twain a racist? Ooh, pithy question. And they have to use both standards of the day 100 years ago and standards of today. Watch what Gail does.
After you read, you're going to have more information.
Don't worry, young one.
Right now, you're just going to do racist. So you're just thinking racist. So we're right over here, okay? So no pen. Connor, put your pen down because I know you. You're going to want to write.
All I need is look close. This is hard.
All right, so you get 1 minute to think of all the reasons he is racist. Okay? So you're thinking for exactly 1 minute. In your own head. Just racist.
So Gail sets a timer. I clipped it to 15 seconds. How often do we give students actual thinking time without jumping into answers? And notice she didn't say, if you want to. No, it's not a choice. It's what we do. But she does it in such a respectful, engaging way
1 minute to write, don't talk.
that, of course, the kids want to do it. Because it's an everyone does everything classroom in an everyone does everything school. This is Sisters, Oregon, by the way, outside of Bend, Central Oregon. We had a project there for a number of years. It's incredibly powerful when you get a whole school using some version of these practices with lots of room for individuality among the teachers. But the big idea we all commit to.
2 minutes, you're going to stand up, hands up, match up, give one, get one. So you give one reason, you get one, okay? So got 2 minutes to stack it to as many people as you can. If you need a new partner, raise your hand.
She calls this stand up, hands up, match up. Every single kid speaking, every single kid writing. And then they go on. They do the same thing from the opposite point of view, and then they do some individual work, and then they do some small group work. We call this give one, get one, or she calls it think, ink, and link. Being an ELA teacher, she likes alliterations, right? But very powerful. So what does the research say about effective discussions, right? It's pretty straightforward. We saw earlier John Hattie's summary of the research about how effective it is at 0.82 effect size, which is huge. And deliberate practice, that means we're practicing these skills within discussion, like using precise academic language, like these various speaking and listening standards where we're learning how to agree and disagree respectfully. So here's a summary. One is preparation is key. Not just our preparation, but preparing the students. You can't discuss, first of all, if you don't know something. You can't discuss if you haven't been taught some rules of the road verbally and cognitively for how to discuss. Then we need to structure it. We have to ask ourselves, how much time do we want to take? What kind of discussion? Can we get some classroom movement engagement? Do we want them writing first, right? And that combination creates effective discussions. Let's unpack this a little bit, right? We already saw the effect size 0.82. That means it really works, and it works whether it's kindergarten through graduate school or with adults, right? So number one, we want to make sure we've created this atmosphere, this culture in the classroom of giving it a go. Mistakes are your friends. Don't worry about being right? That's the climate. Number two, we need to build background knowledge. Oftentimes that might be a careful reading of some information or viewing a short video clip or doing a quick review. And then it's often helpful to build in some kind of partner work first, right, before we go into a whole class discussion. So that way everybody's prepared for and they've expanded their pool of possible responses. And once we get to a whole class discussion, then every single kid is ready to rock. We also find that a related key is how we structure it. Some kind of what people call a discussion protocol or discussion guidelines seems to be really helpful, right? These are really norms for respect, taking turns, using academic language or accountable talk. Pick a strategy, of which there's many. I've included a few of my favorites in this, in the handout that you have, as well as a couple of websites that you can visit where there's many more strategies, but that fit your purpose and your time frame, the age of the kids, etc. Teach and model it first if it's new, so students see what you want and what you don't want, like you saw Anita doing with that hands up idea, modeling what you want, what you don't want. Monitor, give feedback, oftentimes helpful to tie that with some form of written record. It might be in the form of a graphic organizer or Cornell Notes, or just basically answering questions. It's often also helpful to start to use a timer. You can always provide more time, but I find that having a timer helps us move things along, as well as that we're more likely to get everything in that we want to get in. These slides you can look at on your own. They're pretty straightforward. Heads together. Ambassadors is like heads together, but now we're rotating groups. A favorite website of mine is called The Cult of Pedagogy. And what you find here, Jennifer Gonzalez's website, well, I always don't agree with every single thing. I respect what she's doing, former teacher, and there's lots of great resources. Her big list of classroom discussion strategies, and for each one, you can click on it and it will take you to a website where you can see it in action in a classroom. So you can give that a look for more examples of how this everyone does everything plays out. Here's from a whole school that has this Ron Russell Middle School in Portland, Oregon. And they've all agreed that engagement strategies are one major way they're going to accelerate student learning at Ron Russell. So they've really operationalized what that looks like in their classrooms. And you can see from this idea of bell-to-bell learning, structured warm-ups, learning targets, structured student talk, core responses, cold call with no opt-out, or I call it all call, exit tickets, brief nonfiction explanatory writing, teaching student self-assessment. That's not the only way to do it. And obviously it would look different if you're in a primary grade or in high school. But the idea of a school having this frame of reference, so everybody's using some version of this, even though it look very different in individual classrooms. So an engagement bottom line here is really how well we structure equals how engaged they are. It's really up to us. If we're going to make this accelerated learning a reality, then we have to accelerate student engagement. And what that often means is that we're accelerating it for everybody, but we're really prioritizing those kids that have these learning gaps. And if we get this right, it's a win-win. We raise all boats in the harbor. It's not at the expense of the more proficient kids. And and this fostering what Hattie and others call collective efficacy. And I know you can read, but I just for emphasis want to read this one out loud because it really hits a core idea here. Intentionally creating a school culture in which teachers across the school observe each other, plan together, agree on essential high-yield teaching methods like accelerating learning through engagement, and learning in a school. Dramatically effective practices in one classroom can become school-wide shared practices. And my experience is this everyone does everything in collective efficacy. When you get a school like Ron Russell, boy, you look at their data over the last 5 years, and this is a school with a lot of kids of poverty, lots of cultural differences, lots of African-American kids, pretty significant percent of Latino kids or Latinx kids, and they're just knocking it out of the park. And it's not by accident. It's by structured work where we build this collective movement of agreeing on some core things we're all going to do, and then get about the doing it together and giving each other feedback, observing each other, videotaping in classrooms, etc. So here's my understanding of acceleration is having this urgency of why do this? Having a shared instructional focus. I call it the big dogs. What matters most? And certainly engagement is right up at the top of big dogs, right? Distributed leadership. So teachers as leaders, instructional improvement teams that are driven by teachers. This collaborative culture of public practice, right? Where we get feedback that feeds forward and mutual trust and celebration. And of course, formative assessment, we use the daily evidence from how students are responding, because the proof of the pudding is in the eating, not the arguing of recipes, right? And we find that this issue of using evidence from what the students produce, it's not another test, formative assessments, not bringing in more tests. It's using, say, those daily warm-ups, using those exit tickets. It's using those brief quizzes. They inform us as to how effective our instruction has been and which students are still not getting it, so then we can provide additional supports. And of course, leaders who are willing to lead by example, not telling others what to do, but by being an example of what we want to do. And at the building level, once again, you can read these on your own. It's having this shared vision and this shared focus. Here's some websites that you can check out. There's many more. These are some of the ones that I've found most helpful in getting some real practical, specific engagement practices. Some will be more appropriate for older, middle, and high school, some more appropriate for younger kids, but there's lots of good resources out there. And I would just, before we open it up for additional questions, just like to thank you for taking your time, and I hope there's something here that would be useful. And we've got about 5 minutes or so left, so we'd love to have some questions.
All right, so one of the ones that came through early on, you talked about setting up structured partners.
Yes.
And they asked, do you have any specific advice on how to select partners for the structured partner talk work to accommodate learners with a diverse variety of background knowledge and previous success?
Yes, I do. And what we find here, here's a rule of thumb, and then you can modify from there based on your knowledge of the kids, is you want to take your classroom and rank order the kids. So let's say, just for round numbers, we have 30 students. Rank order your kids 1 through 30 on a combination of maturity, proficiency in English, and proficiency in your content area, or if it's elementary, across the content areas. And don't worry about looking at, any sophisticated written assessments, just ballpark. And after 1 or 2 days with the kids, you already know plenty. And then what you want to do is have kid number 1 paired with kid number 16, 17, or 18. In other words, you want higher or more mature with middle. What we find, if you take your highest kid with your lowest or least mature kid, too frustrating for both. If you take two really high and very mature kids together, that can actually work fine. The problem is at the other end, where you have kids that have big gaps in their background knowledge and they're not very confident, they're not very mature. That's a recipe for disaster. So what we find is overall you want higher, and I put high in air quotes, because we're smart enough to know we don't know what intelligence is. It's many things. There's many ways of being intelligent, but we do know what social maturity looks like, and we do know what relative background knowledge in your content area looks like. So basically high with middle can go either way. And then we find it's also helpful to then rotate those, every week or every couple of weeks as base partners. We also then oftentimes want to mix partners around. I see in elementary schools, for example, where they'll have what one teacher called rainbow partners. So she'll have 3 different colors for partners. One selected by the teacher, one would be student choice, and one might be we have specific partners for math or specific partners for reading, because there's such major difference in who's proficient in those topics. So there's many ways of doing it, but the big idea in all of them is we're thoughtful about what kind of partnership based on the activity that we're doing would make the most sense.
Perfect. Thank you.
You bet.
Another question came through is someone works directly with, in coaching and professional learning with adults. Do you think that the principles around engagement as not a choice should apply to adult learners as well?
Absolutely. I've taught community college. I've taught graduate students at 4-year institutions where it was 5th or 6th year. I've done thousands of hours of professional development, and that's the first thing I do when I work with any group is communicate that learning is an active sport. We learn by doing, and that in this, whatever it is, whatever the context is, and then start out by some basic things of partners, of brief written responses and brief choral responses. So absolutely, these work equally well with any age. As long as it's a human being, these work.
Perfect. Thank you. Another question that came through is you talked about the collective efficacy and the power of school-wide. What advice do you have to get a whole school started on any one of these practices?
That's a great question. Well, these are all great questions, but that's a particularly important one. And the first response is it depends, and I don't mean that just generically. It depends on where you are. So if you're already at a school that's pretty collaborative and where we're reasonably stable, we've had most of the same staff, maybe 3/4 with a smattering of new teachers, and we have a principal that gets along pretty well with everybody, we can move much faster than if we're at a school where we have a whole bunch of new people and maybe a brand new principal. So that's the first thing, is one size does not fit all. Here's what we found as a rule of thumb, is establish a implementation team. Some people will have it be a school improvement team. If people don't like the phrase school improvement, you can call it just an implementation team or a instructional focus team. But where we have representatives, if it's elementary school, of primary, intermediate, and upper grade, as well as specialties, maybe special ed or English language support, and the principal, and if you have a coach, and that team meets at least a couple of times a month, and they direct the flow of how we're going to go about this work. Because the issue is you don't want to jump in too forcefully with too many demands and alienate people, but you don't want to sit back and wait for people to be ready. You want to help get people ready. So I find starting with an implementation team, and that team then pilots whatever practices you want to use, and then invite people in. So for example, one of the things that I found really powerful is to use what we call learning walks. Some people call them instructional rounds, where we get a team of teachers to visit a classroom, observe instruction. And what we're really observing is not just instruction, but how students are responding to the instruction. So if we're talking engagement, who's responding in the discussion? Is every kid responding? What's the level of response? Are they using academic language? Are they talking like kids? Are they talking like young mathematicians? Are they using dividend and divisor, etc.? And what we find is that start with people who are willing and develop the norms and develop the confidence and the experience that this is safe, right? And then invite more skeptical teachers, not to have people observe them, but to have them be on the observation team, so they just get to watch and they can participate as they feel comfortable, but they see this is respectful, it's rigorous, it's specific, and it's helpful. So what we find is, and it's really a much longer answer, but the big idea is start with the willing, have a team of teachers, including the principal, that is leading this. And then what I've also found that use of video is to demystify video. We have the power in our purses, in our pockets, that years ago we used to have to spend thousands of dollars on. The power of video is incredible. But what we have to do is de-link video from evaluation. Mm-hmm. And what we find is starting with just people videotaping themselves and only watching it themselves, but create a common protocol for what are we looking for. And boy, student responses is a great one. And I can send you some additional materials on this. I've done this with many tens of schools. And then you scaffold this over time, where we go from observing ourselves to picking a colleague that we feel comfortable with and we observe each other, to then sharing it within a PLC. So we make video our friend and not a threat, because video is one of the most powerful ways we can get a reality check for feedback on what's really going on in our classrooms. That's why we've used it in athletics and the performing arts for years. Mm-hmm. Video is really powerful. We have to decouple it from evaluation and create the environment where it's safe and non-threatening. And we can do this.
Yeah, no, those are really good points about the video. So before we wrap up, I've been asking one question of all of our webinar presenters, which is, can you share one book that's on your professional summer reading list?
I'm going to have to tell the truth here, is that my summer reading list did not include anything professional.
Hey, that's good.
I've been sort of focusing on that. This is my self-defense of taking care of myself. And in that spirit, let me recommend a book.
Okay.
And the book is called This Is Happiness. It's not a self-help book. It's a fictional narrative by Niall, Niall Williams. He was shortlisted for the Booker Prize with his previous book, and it's set in a small town in Ireland called Faha. And it's one of the most gorgeously written, inspiring. It deals with all the day-to-day realities of families and conflict and love and failure and just all the little things that we forget that we often take for granted, and realize that happiness is possible in every moment, depending on how we frame it. And this is happiness. And even if you're not Irish, I have a little bit of Irish blood in me, and I've visited Ireland and loved the culture, but I found it to just be an inspirational, fabulous book, and would recommend it to anyone. If you like audiobooks, an Irish guy reads it, and it's like performance art. It's just incredibly good. This is Happiness, Niall Williams.
Well, thank you so much for that recommendation, and thank you for your time today. There's been lots of kudos and thanks to you in the chat, and appreciation for this webinar. So we thank you very, very much for your time.
My pleasure. Today. Thanks for the opportunity.
All right, you have a good rest of your day.
You guys too.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.